My pen froze above the page. Outside, the wind screamed like some ancient beast awakened beneath the Arctic ice. I'd come chasing a writer's cliche: seclusion, hardship, a real story to inject life into my stalled novel. I never imagined that the frozen north would try to swallow me whole, bone and breath. The storm hit me twice, first like a warning, then like an executioner. I lost my compass, my rations, my will. I saw death crouching in the snow and clawed my way back from its icy jaws. This is how it happened. It was 5 degrees below zero when I crested the last ridge and saw it. A squat, gray cabin half buried in drifts, its windows boarded but sagging. The land around it stretched white and infinite, an ocean of snow, with only the howl of distant wind and the lonely cry of an Arctic fox breaking the silence. My boots sank deep with every step, my breath coming out in ghost-white puffs that vanished instantly. I pulled my parka closer, the hood's fur muffling the gusts. My fingers were already tingling numb. I carried 2 backpacks, one with food, the other with notebooks, charger packs, and my cherished fountain pen. Weeks ago, I'd been stuck on chapter 7, characters lifeless, words falling flat. I'd booked this cabin sight unseen, convinced that brutal solitude would jolt my creativity back to life. By dusk, I'd managed to wedge myself through the warped door. Inside, the dank smell of old wood greeted me. The stove sat cold, a few logs lay beside it, half rotten. I slammed the door, felt the frame shudder under a gust. Out here, the earth's beating heart was a wild windstorm, unforgiving, impersonal. I laid my pack on the rough planks and pounded chunks of wood into the stove's belly. Sparks popped, and soon a lazy flame caught, sending orange light dancing across frost-etched windows. I stripped off my boots and slapped them by the hearth, careful to keep my socks dry. The heat felt miraculous. I pressed my face toward it, tasting relief. After a steaming can of soup, I dared to open my laptop. The screen's glow was comforting in the dark, but my fingers hovered over the keys, stuck. The wind rattled the walls, and I realized this cabin wasn't just a backdrop. It was alive, creaking, groaning, warning me it had claims on anyone foolish enough to stay. I scribbled a single sentence in my notebook, then another, testing the air. The wind outside wasn't the wind. It was something older, scraping at the bones of the world. It wasn't brilliant, but it was a start. I sat back and listened as the storm whispered its promises through the cracks. Night deepened. I slept in clothes, boots beside the bed. My dreams were filled with white shapes moving in slow motion, massive and hungry. I woke thrashing at 2 a.m. to a roar that shook the cabin, the door rattling like it wanted in. By the time dawn bled through the frost, I was certain of 2 things. I was alone, and I was in trouble. I woke to a thunderous crack like the sky splitting in half. My heart jolted. The stove had died, its embers cold and gray. I shoved on my parka, boots, gloves, anything to keep the cold at bay. Through the frosted window, I saw it. Snow whipped into a frothy cyclone, battering the cabin like an enraged animal. The wind's roar pressed against the walls, and every plank trembled. I edged to the door and rested my ear against the warped wood. Somewhere beyond, the storm raged unchecked. My breath hitched. In suburbia, a freeze meant extra socks and hot chocolate. Here it meant buying time with every stick of wood and every breath you stole. I kicked through the snowbank piled against the door, an iceberg born overnight, and flung it open. A blast of near -40 air slammed me back. The world outside was a gray void. No ground, no horizon. I stumbled into the drift, the snow swallowing my boots up to the calves. My parka hood slammed over my face, and I fisted it back to sea. Snow fell in solid sheets, each flake blown flat like shattered glass. Ice crystals danced in the blinding whiteout, turning the sky into a roiling sea. I crouched low, hands on my knees, and felt my lungs burn. Every breath was a razor cutting through my throat. Behind me, the cabin's door clanged shut. I snapped my head back. Had the wind closed it? There was no handle outside. It was a tug-of-war between me and the storm. The sled of my pack had tilted, my supplies shifted. If I lost my rations now, I'd be running on willpower alone, and it wouldn't last. I forced myself up and staggered toward the little woodpile beside the cabin. Each step sank. My arms ached, my lungs screamed. My vision tunneled. I repeated a quiet mantra. 1 foot, then the next. I reached the pile and yanked at as many logs as I could carry. The gale snatched them like twigs, and I tumbled backward. The snowdrift swallowed me to my waist. Panic clutched me. cold and merciless. I punched at the drift, tasted ice in my mouth. I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. But survival doesn't wait for consent. I hauled myself up, hoisted what remained of the wood against my chest, and stumbled back to the door. The wind screamed in my ears, but I forced my body inside, slamming the door against the gale. My glove stuck between the door and frame. I wrenched it free and yanked the latch. Inside, I collapsed by the stove, logs sliding onto the floor. My chest heaved, flames sparked, caught, and grew. Heat blossomed around me, thank God. I ripped off my wet gloves and socks, wrung them out by the fire. My toes tingled with a fiery ache, and then an icy numbness that made me gasp. I ate cold oatmeal straight from the packet, washed down with snowmelt too hot to swallow at first. My hands trembled so badly I nearly spilled the bowl. I stared at the door as the gale battered it. I realized I was trapped. Not by ghosts, not by shadows, but by the raw fury of nature. I flipped open my laptop. Battery at 15%. I typed one word, trapped. Then, blood pounding, heart drumming against ribs, the world gone silent except for a gale that wants me dead. My fingers blurred across the keys. I wrote until the battery warned me, 5% remaining. The storm howled around me all night. Every crack and moan of the wood felt like a warning. I lay on the thin mattress, eyes open, listening to the wind's appetite. I counted my last 5 food packets. I estimated how many meals that would be. 4, maybe 5 if I rationed carefully. Morning came on creaking hinges. I opened one eye. The door was half buried again. I tasted panic like a bad aftertaste. I realized I'd survived the night only to face the same storm today. I was alone, deep in a frozen grave of my own making, and inspiration felt a cruel joke. But somewhere beneath the fear, a spark lit. The same instinct that shoved me back into the storm for wood whispered, "You're a writer. Make this count." I scribbled in my notebook. They say writers need solitude. They never warn you it might follow you into a cold grave. I stared at that line until the gale's roar blurred into background noise. Then I stood, pulled on my gloves, and prepared for the long wait, or the long fight, to come. Day 3 of the siege. I'd eaten the last of my rationed oatmeal that morning. The plastic packet crinkled empty in my hand, sounding louder than any alarm. My stomach churned, hollow and bitter. I glanced at my dwindling woodpile. I could stretch it 2 more days at most. If the stove died, I would freeze alive in my own refuge. Sunlight, fable and gray, filtered through the frost on the windows. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, tracing a finger through the ice. Outside, the world was still a vortex of white. I'd learned that hope was a currency rapidly depreciating here. I opened my pack, a single protein bar, 2 chocolate squares. That was it. A week's supplies meant for a week. I'd burned through them in 3 days of storm and anxiety. I pressed the bar against my tongue, dry sweetness. My mind argued, stay. Wait for the storm to break. But every instinct screamed that waiting meant starvation. The cabin was an oven-sized coffin. I shoved my last scraps into my pocket and swung open the door. A wall of gray wind greeted me, icy breath biting through every layer. I squinted into the whiteness. The ridge where I'd set out days before was a faint smudge. My pack felt impossibly heavy with wind and snow piling on it. I forced my legs forward. Each step was a chore. Snow sucked at my boots, each movement costing precious energy. My lungs protested at the effort. I clenched my teeth against the cold that threatened to lock them solid. My breath came in ragged clouds. I traced my steps back toward the tree line I had vaguely mapped a day earlier, hoping for game or a chance at melted water from dripping branches. Within an hour, I was coughing up ice shards. My gloves were soaked, fingers stiffened. I tried stomping them, wiggling the digits, but relief was fleeting. Hunger gnawed my belly until it felt like claws in my gut. I sank to one knee and unwrapped the chocolate squares. They were already cold and chalky. I chewed slowly, savoring each crumb as if it were a feast. Far off, a hollow echo drifted, like a distant avalanche. My head whipped around, adrenaline scorching away some of the chill. Nothing but snow. I stood and pushed on, a single thought propelling me. Movement. The storm had become a part of me, a relentless force I could either embrace or be crushed by. I chose to embrace it. By noon, the snow had softened in a few patches, revealing ice that gleamed like glass under the muted sun. I followed a barely discernible game trail. It was my only chance. My pace was slow, grinding, Each footfall sounded thunderous in my ears, hollow in the frozen silence. Under my boots, the snow cracked, a warning I ignored. My pack slipped on the ice, sending me sprawling forward. I gasped, palms burning from the ice's bite. I lay there for a moment, chest heaving, the sky spinning in a slow, merciless blur. Then I hauled myself up, knuckles bloodied, and pressed on. Snowdrifts turned into hills, hills into ridges. My world narrowed to inches in front of my face, white on white. I couldn't trust my senses. I was disoriented. I paused, closed my eyes, and counted my breaths in 2, 3, 4, out 1, 2, 3, 4, centering myself. When I opened my eyes, the game trail had vanished. I was alone in the vast, undulating white. Panic flickered. Then I steadied my shoulders. You're a writer who doesn't quit. You find your ending. I searched for landmarks, a lone spruce, a rock outcrop, but found none. Footsteps behind me crunched, another set, lighter, more precise. I spun, heart hammering. For a moment I thought, I can't see anything but snow. Then I saw the antlers breaking the horizon, two curved tines rising above the drift. A caribou bull, massive, nostrils flaring. Hope and fear collided. If it stampeded, I'd be trampled. My pack weighed me down. I thought of dropping it. My fingers strained on the straps. But the bull stood still, eyes locking on mine. We held that stare for seconds that felt like hours. Then it flicked its tail and trotted away, disappearing into the white. My heart slowed. I whispered, thanks, and nudged forward, renewed by the reminder that life clung to this place even if I felt like an echo fading into nothing. By dusk, the first storm's lull was as deceptive as calm before a scream. Dark clouds rolled overhead in sickly sheets, blotting out the pale sun. The wind picked up again, the temperature plummeted. I was miles from the cabin, lost but alive. I gathered what I could, a few frozen twigs for fuel, memorized the position of the few rocks I'd passed. The storm hit like a punch to the chest. Snow ripped sideways, slicing any warmth from the air. My pack twisted off my shoulders, swallowed by drift. I fought for balance, arms flailing. The world collapsed into a swirling storm of white, my footprints erased as soon as they formed. I pressed on, hands clawing at my face to keep the hood from slipping. I couldn't see more than a fist's length. My path was blind faith. Each second was an exercise in refusal. Refuse to sink, refuse to freeze, refuse to give in. Lightning cracked above, sharp, blue-white, a jagged promise of violence. I collapsed against a drift, numbness blossoming in my limbs. I tried to pull out my compass, but my gloves refused to bend. My fingers were blocks of ice. I slammed my palm to my forehead to shock feeling back, and it worked, momentarily. I yanked off a glove, pressed my fingertips to my neck. Pulse was faint, a whisper. If I don't find shelter soon, the thought froze me more than the storm. But at the edge of my sight, a shape emerged. Trees, black and skeletal against the flurry. Salvation or a trap? I crawled, hands splitting on ice, and reached the trunk of the nearest spruce. Under its branches, the snow was shallower. I curled into a ball back against the trunk and wrapped my arms around my knees. Sleep hovered on my eyelids, but hypothermia's lure was deadly. I forced myself to sit up, to shift, to move any part of my body. I hummed. Something childish, a lullaby. Anything to remind my brain it belonged in a living man's body. The storm's roar became a low growl through the night. I felt the tree bending, releasing a flurry of needles that coated me in a thin blanket. It wasn't warmth, but it was protection. I survived that night by sheer stubbornness and the meager shelter of spruce branches. By dawn, the wind had spent itself, leaving behind a world smoothed over like untouched linen. I didn't expect company, least of all something hunting in the storm. At first, I thought the low howl I heard just beyond the tree line was another gust of wind. But the pitch was wrong. Too deliberate, too hollow. I froze, heart hammering. The spruce branches above me rattled as if something massive clawed its way through the night. I uncurled, hands trembling as I reached for the ice-hardened twig I'd been using for balance. My breath came fast, each exhalation frosting in the air like tiny ghosts. The howl came again, closer, sharper. I craned my neck toward the white blur beyond the trees and saw them, eyes shining like embers, a pack of wolves drifting through the storm like ghosts with fangs. Moonlight, or whatever pallid glow filtered through the clouds, outlined their shapes, ribs showing beneath frost-clung fur, jaws parted in silent panting. Hunger was written in every muscle. Instinct screamed, run. But every step forward dug the icy snow deeper underfoot. If I bolted, I'd exhaust myself in seconds. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my back tighter to the trunk, willing my heartbeat to slow. But the lead wolf separated from the pack, a hulking male with a scar across his snout. He sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, every exhale a cloud of steam. He scented me, alive, vulnerable. He padded closer, and the ground trembled beneath his weight. I gripped the twig like a dagger. Adrenaline drenched my veins. I whispered to myself, "You're not his prey yet, you still breathe." But my limbs felt leaden, the world reduced to the span between me and those eyes. The wolf halted 2 yards away. We stared at each other. I saw the calculus in his gaze. Weak target, easy kill. My insides clenched. I forced myself to stand, raising the twig in a shaky salute. "Go away," I rasped, voice cracking. The twig felt laughable, no match for those teeth. He tilted his head as if amused and let out a soft growl that rattled my bones. My knees buckled. I tensed, ready to strike or flee, whichever came first. He lunged. Time stretched. I braced for the impact, swinging the twig, but it snapped against his shoulder. Pain flared as he knocked me off my feet. I tasted blood, coppery in my mouth. He pinned me down, his paws splaying snow around us. I kicked, fists swinging blindly into his neck. Each strike elicited a flurry of snarls, each breath he took searing my ear with hot air. His jaws hovered over my collarbone. I could feel the steam from his breath. I pushed out every ounce of strength I had and rammed my elbow into his snout. He yelped, jumped back, and I scrambled up, chest heaving. The other wolves circled, lean bodies perfect silhouettes against the snow. The lead wolf shook his head, teeth bared in a warning. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, the pack melted away into the storm, their howls receding into the ether. I collapsed to my knees, staggering breaths ripping through my chest. My parka was torn, a shallow cut across my shoulder, oozing warmth that steamed in the cold. My entire body shook, not just from cold, but from the primal terror of facing death so intimately. I swallowed hard, tasting grit and blood. I forced myself to stand, each leg wobbling under me. I pressed a hand to the wound. No time to bandage properly. The cold would kill me faster if I stopped moving. With one last look at where the wolves had vanished, I trudged away, each step an echo of my resolve. I'm still alive. By the time I reached open ground, unprotected by spruce or ridge, the storm had softened to a whisper. The wolves were gone, but I could still feel their eyes on my back. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting them to reappear. None came. I slowed, heart still racing, and pressed my hand against a rock outcrop. It was warmer than the air, its surface dry from the storm's fury. I lowered myself, digging a shallow hollow for a moment's rest. My head lolled back against the stone, vision swimming with snow and blood. I closed my eyes, willing myself to calm. Each breath was a battle, a cold blade in my lungs. I pressed 2 fingers to my neck. Pulse still strong. Alive, yes, but only just. I caught sight of my reflection in a patch of ice on the rock, eyes wide, cheeks drawn into hollows, frost-white lashes clumped together. I looked like a specter, one step away from joining the ghosts of the north. But I stood again. I had no choice. The cabin was still miles away. Night would fall, and with it temperatures would dive another 10 degrees. My pack was torn, my supplies gone. But I had a story now, written in my scars and my terror. And I wasn't ready to die. With the broken twig bundled in my pocket and my shoulder burning, I set off once more, forward into the white heartbeat and resolve my only guides. The world tilted without warning. One moment I was trudging forward, the next a thunderous crack echoed through the ridge above me. My blood froze as I looked up. An entire wall of snow broke loose, hurtling down with the force of rolling thunder. I tried to sprint, but the avalanche was faster. It slammed into me like a freight train of ice, sweeping me off my feet. I tumbled end over end through the blinding white, limbs flailing as tons of snow slammed into me from every side. My lungs burned, my vision squeezed into incandescent flashes of white. Then, with a final, crushing shove, the world went still. Darkness pressed in. I was pinned under a weight so heavy I could barely move a finger. Every breath felt like drawing shards of glass into my lungs. Panic churned in my gut, but I had only seconds before unconsciousness closed in. I clawed at the snow above me, fingers scrabbling blindly in powder so tight it felt like cement. My arms ached with the effort. Snow filled my mouth, choking me. I attempted a desperate inhalation, ice and shards. My throat spasmed. Then I remembered the dead man's knot trick I'd read about for mountaineers. Exhale fully, make a small air chamber, then carve out snow bit by bit. I forced my eyes open against the pressure. I exhaled, sealing my lips around a small pocket of air. I pressed both fists forward and pushed snow away. It shifted, just a fraction, but enough for my hand to slip through. I worked methodically. Exhale, press, push, repeat. The world was a silent tomb, my pulse thundering so loud I felt sure the wolves might hear it. But I couldn't stop. Ice dripped down my foreheads as sweat from panic froze on my brow. Moments bled into eternity. My shoulders screamed. My knuckles bled from scraping against hard-packed snow. Then, air. A finger of blue sky appeared. I clawed through softening powder, chest heaving. My parka snagged on a hidden rock, jamming me. I pried it free and kicked upward until my head burst through the surface. I sucked in a ragged breath of thin, freezing air. My lungs burned, but it was life. I rolled free of the drift, coughing out snow in panic. The avalanche had gouged a scar in the ridge. Trees lay snapped like matchsticks. I lay there, back against the jagged earth, staring up at the dull sky. My side throbbed, a sharp pain that bloomed every time I breathed. But I was alive, and I hadn't given in. Night's chill was returning fast. I was hours from the cabin, if it still stood, and too weak to make it in one push. I rummaged through my pockets, nothing but the broken twig, a few shards of frozen chocolate, and a battered lighter. I struck it. The tiny flame sputtered, but it was hope. I scanned the talus below the avalanche's snout. Rocks and uprooted saplings protruded, maybe enough to form a lean-to. With shaking hands, I gathered branches and stones, propping them against a fallen spruce. The structure was pathetic, a child's shelter, but it broke the wind. I crawled inside, curling around my aching side. The lighter's glow danced across my parka, casting frantic shadows. I held it to my ribs, letting the warmth seep into the deepest places. I hummed that lullaby again, desperate to keep the edges of consciousness at bay. Hunger sang its cold song in my gut. I split the chocolate into shards and sucked on each one slowly, savoring the fleeting sweetness. I closed my eyes and let memory carry me away. My heated office back home, the clack of my keyboard, coffee warm in my hand, the contrast cut deep, luxury I never missed until now. A fresh gust rattled the makeshift shelter. I forced my eyes open. My breath was visible, little puffs in the dark. I knew hypothermia would creep next, numbness, slow drift to sleep. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to sit up, however painfully. I struck the lighter again, setting a tiny circle of moss ablaze. I cupped it under my face, breathing the warmth. Time passed in tortured slowness. Every minute felt like an hour. I whispered to myself, "You're a writer. You've faced deadlines, rejections. This is just another story, except this time you're the protagonist." The thought felt absurd and empowering at once. My eyelids drooped. I punched my thigh. Pain jolted me awake. I swiped at my wet hair. My scalp was stiff with frost. I kicked out of the shelter, backed by the rocky slope, and strapped my boots tighter. If I stayed, I'd freeze. I needed to move. Pulling in a shuddering breath, I stood. My legs wobbled, but they held. I cast one last look at my shelter, my grave and my cradle, both born from desperation. Then, head down against the gale, I forced my body forward. Each step was agony. My sides burned, my muscles trembled. But with every footfall, I chipped away at the distance between me and survival. The stubby sun hovered just above the horizon, casting a pale lavender glow over the snow. It was now or never. My legs burned with exhaustion, each breath a knife twisting in my side. The cabin, my only hope, was a ghostly silhouette in the distance, half buried but still standing. I forced myself forward, one agonizing step at a time. The wind had settled into a soft hiss, but the cold bit deeper than ever. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. Ice formed on my eyelashes. Every muscle threatened to give out. I leaned into the wind like a ship bracing a gale, body rigid against the elements. A hidden mound tripped me. I pitched forward, hands smashing into the crust of snow. Pain lanced through my palms and shoulders, but I forced myself up. I crawled the last few feet, only to realize the cabin's door was invisible, buried beneath a drift as tall as me. My heart dropped. If I couldn't get in, I'd die mere yards from safety. I slammed my shoulder into the drift, using every ounce of strength left. Snow cascaded down, revealing the worn wood of the door. I yanked at the latch, frozen solid. Panic flared, and I kicked at the boards, boots cracking frost-bitten wood. My arms shook uncontrollably. Then, with a final roar, I hit the latch with the heel of my hand. It gave. The door swung inward, and I tumbled through, collapsing into the warmth and dim orange glow of the stove's embers. I lay on the floor, body spent, mind fraying. The door clanged shut behind me, and a wave of relief so intense it nearly unhinged me rolled through my chest. I curled into a ball, tears freezing on my cheeks. I would have laughed, cried, or screamed, anything to prove I was still human. After what felt like hours, I staggered to the stove. My hands were too numb to feed it more wood, so I rummaged for kindling and coaxed the embers back to life. Flames licked eagerly at the damp logs, and for the first time in days, I felt warmth seep into my bones. I stripped off my parka and boots, wincing as I tended to my injuries. My shoulder throbbed, cuts along my palms stung, and every inch of me protested. I wrapped my shaking fingers around a tin cup and drank hot water until it burned a trail down to my stomach. I could almost taste civilization. Coffee, a real meal, the chatter of people. But I knew something else had survived too, my writer's spark. I sank by the stove, notebook in one hand, pen in the other. My fingers traced the gouges and burns as if finding new armor. Then, in the flickering light, I wrote. I went into the frozen north seeking inspiration. I found something else. I found the edge of death, the will to claw back, and the story of a man who refused to become a whisper in the wind. As the fire crackled, I watched the words appear on the page. Each syllable was a tribute to pain and triumph, a testament that I had not only survived but lived to tell the tale. Back home, I sit by a large window overlooking a bustling city street. My skin tingles with the faintest memory of cold. The air smells of spring blooms and exhaust fumes, a reminder that life carries on in myriad forms. I hold the finished manuscript in my hands, its spine creased, pages dog-eared. Friends and colleagues tell me the novel is my best work yet. They speak of vivid imagery, raw emotion, and unrelenting tension. They don't know I paid for those words with frostbite and fear, with every fiber of strength I could summon beneath that gray sky. At night, I still hear the winds howl. Sometimes I close my eyes and can almost feel the ice pressing against me, the wolf's hot breath on my neck, the avalanche's roar. And I smile, because I know I carried the frozen north inside me and lived to write its story. Because inspiration isn't found, it's earned, in the marrow of your bones, in the crack of despair when you choose to stand again. I went to the frozen north for inspiration. I barely made it out alive, and I wouldn't trade a single frozen second. That was the story. If you made it this far, thank you. Truly. Your time, your attention, your support, it means everything. If you felt something while listening, tension, fear, hope, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And if you want more immersive survival horror stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. I've got more stories that'll leave your heart racing. Until then, stay safe out there.